From a highly secure network of top secret locations across North America, this is the Spurs Insider post-trade edition. I'm your host, Mike Finger. As always, joined by Express News, Spurs beat writer Jeff McDonald, and sports editor Nick Talbot. We are not graced with Tom Worsborn's presence this week. Unfortunately, he's flying to his next secure location. But the rest of us have lots to say about the newest Spur, Jordan McLaughlin, as well as De'Aaron Fox. Jeff, after years and years of speculation that the Spurs were looking at a point guard of the future that might have a point guard of the future in mind, they got their man and they did not pay that much for him. What are your thoughts?
Well, before we get to my thoughts, I just want to say I appreciate you being geographically accurate in the in the intro there. It's not across South Texas. We're across North America right now.
Correct. You're still in Memphis. You're still in Memphis.
Still walking in Memphis. Anyway, De'Aaron Fox and Jordan McLaughlin. What a haul! What a haul! You're right. We've been wondering, and Spurs fans have been pining and sometimes frustrated. When are the Spurs going to push all their chips to the center of the table and cash them in for, another star running mate for Victor Wembanyama? And they didn't really have to push all their chips in, or even the most important ones. They got De'Aaron Fox, and I don't, with no offense to Trey Jones and Zach Collins and Sidi Sissoko, but I don't think they gave up anything that they really didn't want to. I think they got their man, De'Aaron Fox, and they gave up, players they could live with losing. They didn't give up any of their top 8 core players, none of those young guys, not Devin Vassell, not Stephon Castle, not Keldon Johnson, not Jeremy Sohan. They were able to keep their core intact. The picks they gave up are picks you can live with. The Charlotte one's not even going to be a first rounder. The Bulls one, the Bulls probably could have got their own pick back anyway just by being bad. So it's almost they're getting a pick that probably wasn't going to convey. The Minnesota pick will probably end up being something, or could end up being something, but whatever. And they gave up their own 2027, which they have Atlanta's that year, which is probably going to be better than the one they gave up. So all the stuff they gave up, they got an all-star caliber point guard, and it was pretty good work by your Spurs front office, I would say.
When you, it sounds like, I wrote a column for the Express News, expressnews.com, Spurs Nation newsletter, all that stuff, which you can, we appreciate all the readership that you guys have given us. Always good. Don't just listen to the podcast, check in on what we do at our day jobs. That's great. But I talked about what a heist this has been, and that's overused. That's trite when we talk about NBA trades. A lot of times it's not really accurate. I mean, this weekend also included a Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis trade, which got a lot more attention and a lot more people calling that robbery. But really, the Lakers gave up a Hall of Famer to get Luka Doncic. And I know that's a one-sided trade, and I know why Mavericks fans are so exasperated about that. The Spurs seriously gave up the 2 main players they gave up. They were going to have to get rid of at some point for salary reasons. Like, Trey Jones was a free agent anyway. He had no role next year. Zach Collins, that contract that he had was something that the Spurs needed a way to get rid of. They weren't playing him anymore. Jeff just broke down the picks. The Chicago, there was a good chance they were going to get that pick back anyway because it was protected for the next 3 years, as Jeff pointed out. That is basically nothing. The Charlotte pick cracks me up because, to me, that's almost a way for Sacramento to say at the press conference, we got this extra first-round pick. In no universe is that a first-round pick. Like that. The only way that's a
Charlotte
first-round
has to make the playoffs this year for that to be
Charlotte
a first
has
round.
to make the playoffs this year. Charlotte has to start winning games at just an unprecedented rate to make the playoffs.
They might have to run the table.
Yes, like there's no way that's a first round pick. That's passed along just so Sacramento can say we got 3 first round picks when in fact you just got 2. Um, Really, all you gave up here were the Spurs' own pick in 2027, when the Spurs expect to be contending, at least picking in the bottom third of the first round. I mean, what do we expect that pick to be? At best, 22, 23, something like that, if things go well. And then that pick that they got for the second first round pick they had this past year, that night when everyone was upset that they did not take Rob Dillingham or Dalton Connect or whatever, after they took Stephon Castle, like that pick that everyone was up in arms saying, why did they not make their selection at the 2024 draft? And why did they take this pick that isn't going to be able to be used for 7 years? Well, they used it 7 months later to get the point guard that they have coveted for years, and one that fits perfectly into their system. And the age fit might not be picture perfect. Like De'Aaron Fox is 27, Victor Wembanyama is 21, but it's pretty close. Like that, you're gonna get, you would hope 4 years of De'Aaron Fox's peak, maybe. That's pretty good to have around Victor Wembanyama and Stephon Castle and Devin Vassell and Jeremy Sohan and this whole Spurs nucleus. It's staggering to me how well they did in this deal. And it dates back to 2.5 years ago when they traded DeJounte Murray to the Atlanta Hawks for what was then called 4 first-round picks. One of those was that Charlotte pick, which obviously won't become one. One of them is a swap, which probably will be swapped next year. DeJounte Murray wasn't part of their future anyway. Trading DeJounte Murray allows you to get bad enough to get Victor Wembanyama. You get Victor Wembanyama. You get to keep all these Atlanta picks as Atlanta is sort of facing a time when they don't know what their future is with Trae Young. And on top of all that, you get a point guard that's better for you than DeJounte Murray was, timeline-wise, maybe talent-wise, all that stuff. I'm not usually the sunshine pumper, the blue sky, the optimist here, but it's just, as you sort of want to tip your hat to a job well done, a plan well executed, all that type of stuff. Now they have to start winning. Now they have to start doing something with it. But man, I can't imagine a way they could have pulled this off better over the past 2-3 years.
If you had told me on Saturday the Spurs are going to end up with De'Aaron Fox and they will not have to give up either Devin Vassell nor Stephon Castle, and they'd still get to keep everything they got from Atlanta, I don't even need to hear the rest of the details. I would have said, good job.
Yeah.
But I also would assume like there'd be a Keldon Johnson in there or something like that. And there wasn't even that. So good work. Now you talk about winning. I guess we can talk about De'Aaron's fit. We can talk about where they go from here. We can talk about what the expectations are, maybe for the final 30 some odd games of this season. And then, beyond, there's a lot to break down. There's a lot to talk about.
Well, here's another, just to put a bow on that heist type of deal. You said keeping Vassell and Castle was the biggest thing, and that absolutely is. Like, those are the two.
I thought for sure they would have to trade one of them.
Well, I wasn't so sure. I didn't think that. I thought that they had leverage. I thought that the like a Keldon Johnson was the guy that had to go. Like that's the usable piece that you would have thought that Sacramento would have wanted there, and the one that the Spurs would be willing to give up. That didn't happen. That's what kind of blew me away. I
think what I really thought would happen was the Kings would want either Vassell or Castle, and the Spurs would say, we're not going to do that right now, and the deal wouldn't get done. That's what I really thought would happen. And what the Spurs did, obviously, like the Kings want talent. They wanted talent like win now talent, which was what Steph Castle would have been.
Right.
Spurs aren't going to include that, so you rope in a third team to provide that piece of the deal in Zach LaVine.
I think and the Kings did not do as poorly in this as the Bulls did. Like if there
Right.
was a
I think the Kings did
if there
okay
was a
considering they're over a barrel.
right.
The Bulls did
The
not do
victim
well.
of this larceny here was not necessarily the Kings as much as it was the Chicago Bulls, who basically just got back what they started with. It's crazy.
And they got out of a Levine contract that they've been trying to get out of for years, like since the ink was dry, basically.
Well, the only thing that really helped them is getting the pick back is if they make more moves over here, they can actually tank now. They were kind of in that weird situation, but they still did not do very well in this deal. They might have done almost as bad as the Mavericks did in their deal. They just didn't get anything back for them.
Well, see, that's the misconception about that Bulls pick is that the Bulls actually were incentivized to tank before they got the pick back, because if they were bad, it was the opposite of Atlanta. If they were bad, they kept the pick because it was top 10 and the top 8 protected. So now they, in a weird way, are free to not have to worry about that. Like if they start winning next year, they get to keep the pick. Whereas when the Spurs had it, if they had been tanking, anyway.
I think they
had started winning, the Spurs would have gotten like a top 11 pick, whatever. What I was going to say before about what the Spurs kept is when we were running through the idea of the Spurs acquiring De'Aaron Fox at this deadline, what they might have to give up, and we were looking at the rest of this 2025 season. One thing I was thinking about is if the Spurs make this trade and they add De'Aaron Fox, well, then all of a sudden there's a hole in the second unit where Keldon Johnson was, or there is a hole. I didn't think this would happen, but there was a hole in the starting lineup where Devin Vassell was. Or if the Kings were insistent on continuing to compete for their play-in spot, that they would hey, we're giving up our point guard, you give us Chris Paul back. And then so the Spurs would have a hole where Chris Paul was. The Spurs basically added a former All-Star, hugely impactful point guard to their rotation and gave no one from their rotation up. He's replacing Trey Jones. But Zach Collins wasn't playing anyway. CD Sissoko wasn't playing anyway. They're almost, well, not almost. They're better equipped now in every way to compete for the next few months. And I know that's not the priority here, but that sort of surprised me about the deal is I thought there would have been maybe a step back over the next few months as they retool and figure out what their future is. They can continue to try to win. And Jeff, they did not do that last night against the Grizzlies because the Grizzlies just kicked their tails every time they play them, and De'Aaron Fox wasn't there yet, and they might not make the play-in this year, but I think that's not an unrealistic goal for the rest of the season to move up a couple spots and get into that play-in.
I agree to a point, but I also want to temper expectations for everybody because I think there's a tendency when you add a guy like De'Aaron Fox, everyone's excited. Everyone's for good reason. Like he's going to be great with Victor Wembanyama, but I don't think it's going to happen immediately. I think there might actually be some growing pains towards the end of the year this year. In part because I don't know what. In part because I don't know what the lineups are going to look like. Like in an ideal world, you're not going to start Chris Paul and De'Aaron Fox together. No. You're not going to start that small, but you kind of have to for the end of the rest of this season. You're not going to tell Chris Paul he's got to go to the bench. You're not going to bring De'Aaron Fox off the bench. You're probably going to move Steph Castle back to the bench and just be really small. And it's not the best basketball lineup. Everybody knows that's not the best basketball lineup to win games, but you're just for human reasons. That's how you're probably going to have to be how you finish the year. And then when Chris won't be back next year, I think that's one thing this trade probably did was kind of eliminate that dream scenario for us reporters that the Spurs don't add a point guard. Chris Paul comes back for another year of this. Probably he's not going to come back because he doesn't want to come off the bench. He doesn't want to be a sidelight. He wants to run the show. And when you've traded for De'Aaron Fox, that's going to be your point guard. But I think they finished the season, unless something happens before the deadline, or something else happens. I think they finished the season with Chris and De'Aaron playing together, Steph coming off the bench, and then they kind of figure out what they really want to be over the summer and going into next year. So it wouldn't surprise me if they don't. This isn't just an automatic. We're making a run to the play-in now. But I also, if I would urge Spurs fans not to panic if it doesn't look like so pretty all at once, because once they still have pieces to put together like that, a De'Aaron Fox Wemby pick and roll is going to be pretty unguardable, and the Spurs are going to be super unguardable when you can put some shooting around that. Some really like top shelf, like the ball swings to that guy and it's like, oh my God, he's going to make it, like that kind of shooting around it. And once they get that, that's really going to be clicking. That's going to be a hard thing to guard, but it's going to take a while. It's still going to take some more work from the front office to get it to get the final product,
Well, that's a lot of interesting stuff, and I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of it, but I was taking mental notes here, trying to keep up with a couple of things that I wanted to run past you. First of all, absolutely, like there's no guarantee that they're going to make the play-in this year, that the season's just going to magically turn around. They're going to start winning in bunches and get there. I think my point was they're no worse off. There's no reason to think that's not realistic. Like I think they have a run in them. They have at least one run in them over these next few months, and I think that it might be close to a coin flip if they make the play, and I think that their odds might be that high. Like I would not be surprised. Second, on the starting lineup thing, I think that most of us tend to dwell too much on that, and Jeff, you might have some intel there. But I'm not. Let's just throw the starting lineup aside for a second. Like, I think one thing this trade does over the next few months is it puts the Spurs in a situation where, for most of the meaningful minutes every night, by most I mean I'm going to say like 90%, like either Chris Paul or De'Aaron Fox is running the show. Yeah. And whether that means that they're both starting, or whether that, like, I don't think it wouldn't knock my socks off if they brought Chris Paul off the bench. Like, he's not part of their future. He's a good basketball guy. Like, and here's the other thing.
I just think they respect him too much.
The reason he came to the Spurs in the first place is, okay, partly Victor Wembanyama, partly Greg Popovich. But even at his introductory press conference, the first day he was in San Antonio, he said it wasn't really that as much as this was the one place that allowed him to ball. It's like, it's not like they don't they're very good to veteran players. They want to do right by Chris Paul, all that stuff. But it's not like other places were offering Chris Paul the chance to start. And it's not like other places will offer Chris Paul the chance to start next year. And and Chris Paul came off the bench last year. Like, he's done it before.
Hated it. He will tell you it's the worst year of his life.
Okay.
Hated it.
Okay.
If you move him there, it's got to be against his will, and you can do that.
You're probably right.
Mitch Johnson can go tell a point guard a year older than him, yeah, we're moving you to the bench. But I just don't see that happening. I don't think it's going to weather the last 30 games, realizing the play-on isn't really the goal. That's what I think they're going to do. But I could be wrong.
I think that you're probably right. I question, and that's cool. Like, the Spurs have come a long way with treating people right and showing respect to veterans, all that stuff.
You're also
I wonder though if they wouldn't be better served long term as a franchise at getting a look at the starting lineup that they're going to be using next year, if we're sure that Chris Paul is gone. Like, that's why I think Chris Paul understands that, and I don't think that, like, Chris Paul was not a bad teammate last year. I think you're sort of exaggerating how miserable he was.
I don't know about that. He didn't seem thrilled coming off the bench last year.
Well, I mean, okay, like, that's fine. and this is me not saying what the Spurs are going to do. I would suggest that there would be benefit in looking at a De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell, Stephon Castle, Harrison Barnes, Victor Wembanyama starting lineup, because I think that's going to be the starting lineup next year. And I think Jeremy Sohan probably, okay, maybe he could replace Harrison Barnes at some point, but I think Jeremy Sohan might be evolving into a guy who might be a long-term bench piece. I think with Keldon Johnson, that's a pretty good bench there. I think that Chris Paul, if you move into the bench, you bring him off the bench quickly. You get him a lot of Victor Wembanyama minutes, because that's been the best two-man lineup with the Spurs all year. But I'm not sure I want to see 30 games of a lineup with De'Aaron Fox and Chris Paul together starting. Maybe this is the hot take podcast now, but I don't know.
The thing is, even though as Victor says, these players can be treated like objects. They're not objects. They're human beings with feelings, and that doesn't always matter. But I do think the Spurs will give some deference to Chris Paul.
I think you're probably right.
And so I wouldn't be surprised. That's all I'm saying. I don't know nothing about nothing, but I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I wouldn't either. I'm not disputing that.
The part you're correct about is you can start the game however you want, and then kind of tweak your rotation to where those guys aren't playing together a whole lot.
And maybe that is the.
And if you want to see that,
go ahead.
And if you want to see that starting lineup from next year, you can probably tweak your rotation where those five get good chunks of minutes together.
That's probably how we split the difference here. Is you get to you let Chris Paul continue to start where he gets introduced, and he holds on to that role as the starting guy, and then you make sure that there are a lot of minutes featuring your lineup in the future. I think that adds a little extra layer of complicatedness.
I think a lot of the issue with starting though is also closing, which is Chris Paul's. That's
and I think
that's one thing he's really good at. And when the things are starting, they also think they're closing, and then they're going to be
that's absolutely true, and that's one thing that I was going to get to, is that you want Chris Paul helping them close games, and generally, Jeff can speak to this, having covered the NBA for 97 years. Like, teams tend to go smaller, and when the game's on the line, and you have more of the ball handlers, more of the playmakers out there, and at the end of games, like having Chris Paul, De'Aaron Fox, both as pick and roll options for Victor Wembanyama, like, that's pretty salty. Like that seems like a great thing to have. As long if you have two other shooters out there to keep defenses honest, like, that could be cool.
De'Aaron Fox is 2 years removed from winning that Clutch Player of the Year award. There's been years where he's led the league in fourth quarter scoring. So that's another, like you said, that's another fourth quarter crunch time option. If the Spurs could ever get a game to crunch time anymore.
Right. Well, and so that's I think my issue with all this is they need to figure out a way, if it's starting them both, if it's bringing one off the bench. Like, I don't think there should be 12 minutes during every game when neither De'Aaron Fox or Chris Paul are out there. Like, I think that would be a mistake. I think if you have those two guys, you want one of them out there at most times. And I think Mitch will figure that out. But I think you were attempting a pretty good segue there that I ruined, about how the Spurs never play close games anymore. Do we want to talk about that?
Except for that one against Miami that they lost the buzzer. But other than that,
that's true. Yeah,
it's blowout city.
So they can play a close game without Wemby.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe Wemby's the problem.
I think I'm starting to get what Wemby had, by the way. I'm dreading it. It's that feeling in the back of your throat. Like, it felt like allergies for a while, and it might not be.
Oh, yeah.
Wemby
Boy,
came back
he was
from Paris
sounding awful last night. He didn't do the podium. We just got him in the locker room, and he sounded worse than he did the other night.
Yeah.
He sounded bad for, and Memphis is one of the last places where we're still on the floor, so I could see a lot better. And he was sucking wind, man. And I kind of noticed that, like, he didn't seem to have his energy. You didn't know him. If you know better, sometimes you think he's dogging it. Like, you'd miss a shot and just sort of be really sluggish getting back on defense. And then you talk to him after the game. It's like, oh, he is sick as a dog.
Yeah.
Like he's not feeling great. So I guess that's something worth monitoring. That's not a good way to start a rodeo trip. Is sick. Like you usually get that at the end. Hopefully he can shake it.
Well, for your local Cagers, a good way to start the road trip is not going to Memphis either. Like that, they just have that team's
They
number.
also ended there in March.
Yeah. One thing I did see that I was surprised about. There's a friend of the podcast called John Schumann who works for NBA.com who breaks down like schedule strength every month. And this month where your local Cagers are not local at all, where they go the entire month playing away from Frost Bank Center. The one game on the 1st of February against Miami, the Spurs are projected to have the 4th easiest schedule in the league. Does that seem surprising to you? I guess it's just that it's a lot of the Charlottes and Washingtons,
but not a lot. Just those two.
A few. Well,
Atlanta.
Atlanta's not playing well. Atlanta's lost like 8 in a row.
2 New Orleanses.
2 New Orleanses at the end. That's all thrown in there.
I guess
the point being that they're on the road, but that it's not an intimidating road trip, and they do have the 2 in Austin, which are quote unquote home games. One against Detroit, one against the reeling Phoenix Suns, which may or may not have Jimmy Butler, may or may not have Kevin Durant. Like that would be wild if Kevin Durant goes back to Golden State. All kind of ways that
I don't think players of that caliber get traded in midseason. This is not going to be.
This is not going to be the 967th Luka Doncic podcast of the weekend. We're not gonna talk about that too much because people don't care what we have to say. That was pretty crazy, though.
Oh, you have to know.
That's my take. It's pretty crazy.
Giant F for the Mavericks. That's all you need to know. That's all anyone can say.
They gave a giant F to their.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, it's true. We're not going to get into it. Like it's wild to me how we're just like a first ballot Hall of Famer is just being dismissed as nothing in this. Like that's like I think it's a bad trade for the Mavericks. Like people I think are underselling Anthony Davis a little bit, but that's beside the point.
The one thing I'm going to point out, because it's a point you've made about the Spurs, how the Spurs can do some of the moves that they make and collect some of the assets that they collect, that will take a pick swap 7 years from now. It's because their front office guys are probably still going to be here 7 years from now.
Yeah.
And Nico Harrison, like he just said it in that press conference. I don't care about 10 years from now because we're not going to be here. All I care about is the next 3 to 4 years. And so the Spurs are always, and he's not the only, he said it out loud, but he's not the only GM in the world, in the league that feels that way. There's probably 28 others. So the Spurs are always dealing with people.
The Spurs just dealt with a couple of them on the trade they just did with front offices.
Yeah, always dealing with people that, are buying on credit. Like, sure, you can have something 7 years from now. That doesn't matter to me. Whereas the Spurs know 7 years from now, if they make that pick, they'll be able to make that pick. It'll probably be the same guys making the pick. So having that kind of continuity and longevity in the and job security in the front office kind of allows you to do some things that you can't if you're always having to worry about the next year and the next year and the next year.
And that's a good point that we talked about before. And it's a good kind of close for this week's podcast. And it goes back to some of the frustration that our loyal listeners, that our loyal readers have occasionally voiced to us, understandably, about how sometimes those of us on this podcast have tended to be too reluctant to call the Spurs idiots for some of the stuff that they've done that the readers and listeners don't understand. And there's been times when people have been pleading, especially during these down years that the Spurs have had. Like, why don't you call them out for not making more big moves? Why don't you call them out for not going after Trae Young when they have the chance? Why don't you call them out for all this stuff that just doesn't make any sense? Trading this pick. They could have had Rob Dillingham. They could have had Dalton Connect. Why are they trading for this move in 2031? And Mike Finger and Jeff McDonald will never dare come out and say that Brian Wright's an idiot for making these terrible moves. And it's not that we think they're all going to work out, and it's not like we're homers. Like I think most of the time we're far from being homers. We understand that there's a really good chance that if we do that, like we're the ones who are going to be looking like idiots 7 months later when it turns out they've had the plan all along to get the guy they wanted. And the Spurs just have a really good track record of putting a plan in place and sticking to it and making it work. And this, like they still have a lot of work to do. Nothing was guaranteed this week. Like De'Aaron Fox, he has his flaws as a player. Like it would be great if he could shoot better than 33% from three. Like that would really help the Spurs out. Is he the type of player who ages well into his 30s? The guys with speed aren't necessarily always that guy. But like Jeff's right. Like the Spurs always have the long-term plan in mind. They have guys who know they're going to be here for years and years because they're not afraid of getting fired. The Spurs ownership, CEO, all down the line, they all understand that there's long-term plans to stick to and that you can't be firing guys willy-nilly if you want them to stick to that plan. And I just think they're in a really good place now moving forward. You still want them to show the steps. If they don't show the improvement, if they don't add the next guy, I think there's another guy to add at some point. Maybe the third best guy isn't here yet after Victor and De'Aaron, but man, it's just like Jeff said. They think ahead, and this is another example of it.
Do you think they have to add someone between now and Thursday, or can they be done for now?
Like it wouldn't hurt. Look, during that game last night, Charles Bassey looked like that his knee was bad again. I think he ended up being okay. You might be able to add on that, but
yeah, he was.
And he's not.
No, he's not
integral to the future or the next few months. But just that's another reminder of how thin they are at that position. Like if he was going to be out, they were kind of in a bad place. Also, they have a spot open now because they sent 3 guys out and brought 2 back. And could that be something that's used after the deadline? Like they could go on the buyout market and add a big man, right?
Right.
I was also looking at just the type of guys who are out there available. I haven't even seen these guys in trade discussions, but like New Orleans has Daniel Tice, who makes almost no money, just a veteran type of big man type backup. Mo Bamba was just traded and waived
about
maybe.
Mo, yeah.
Who's really interesting to me, and the Spurs will not get him because there's legitimate contenders interested in him. A guy making no money who would be amazing for a lot of reasons is Gershon Yabusele, who I watched in Paris this summer playing with Victor. The Sixers are probably going to trade him to a contending team, but putting him next to Victor again as a backup, whatever would be really cool.
I think it's clear to everybody.
Go ahead.
It's clear to everybody the Spurs need more depth behind Victor, backup big men. Like everybody in the league, they need more shooting. I guess I would just caution everybody that it's not. We have to do this before Thursday, before the end of the year. They probably need to get those issues resolved before the beginning of next year, though.
Oh yeah.
So if they're not going to do it now, then that's the off season. And if they come out of the off season without shoring up their big man depth, without adding at least some guy that can make a 3, then I would say that's troublesome. But it doesn't have to happen between now and Thursday, is what I want to make everyone aware of. Because the
yeah,
Spurs are still not saying we got to make the play-in, we got to make the playoffs this year. That is not really the goal. That's almost like if it accidentally happens, that's good.
yes, and they're two different. They're two different discussions, two different priorities in terms of the rest of this year when it would help, either just as a really, really minor trade or as a buyout type of pickup over the next month or so. Like that's where you probably want to add another big man to fill out your 15-man roster. That's completely different than the priorities for the offseason when you want to add shooting, if you want to add longer term depth behind Victor. And one way to use it is you still have 2 first-round picks, still 2 picks that probably will end up being in the top 12, top 15 of the lottery. Crazy that they were able to pull that off. That brings us full circle to where we started. Spurs got their man, held on to all the assets they wanted to hold on to. That's some good news for Spurs fans this week, and something to feel optimistic about the future. If you need something like that these days, glad we could help provide it for you. And Tom will be back to help provide it for you next week. And until then, take care of each other and keep it real.